Well, Happy New Year. Look at that. It's a brand new year, which of course means it's a great time to contemplate where to focus your time, attention, and efforts, what's most important, where you want to perhaps lay a little focus. And so now seems like it's a great time to talk about how private trusts can help you with asset protection, privacy, and limited liability in commerce. So before we dive into that topic, let me just briefly introduce myself. I'm David Greenberg, and I'm the founder and managing director of the Freedom Studio. We are a private education organization. We help you to learn how to be untouchable in the courts. We teach you how to protect and defend all of your assets, how to essentially make your business judgment proof, and how to live privately and in peace without creating controversy. So if that resonates with you, then stick with me here because I've got some great stuff to share with you, and let's go ahead and dive in. All right. And of course, I want to give a warm welcome back to my existing subscribers. If you're someone that's been following my work, I obviously appreciate you as much as I do someone who is new to what we're doing here. So for this new year, and for the topic I want to discuss on this video today, we're going to talk about private trusts and how they are really so powerful as a vehicle for asset protection, privacy, and limited liability in all of your commercial endeavors. Okay, so we're gonna have to unpack this a bit. Now, first of all, chances are very good that you at least have heard about trusts and private trusts. It's a well-known concept, if not, generally not really taught as much as it could be. Of course, many times we hear about the negative connotations of trusts. So most people have heard about antitrust legislation, trust fund babies, which is kind of a derogatory term, so-called spoiled rich kids who live off of trust funds. Now, all of those things are true, and those are based on, things that really happen. But unfortunately, what that tends to do is discourage people from looking into trusts. On the other hand, many people are also aware that you can hire attorneys to help create what's called a living trust or certain types of trusts. And, some people will do that, but some people also will be discouraged because they'll say, oh, I have to pay potentially thousands of dollars to an attorney to set that up for me. It may just not be worth it or just not clear about the value. So let me just make a couple of things clear. Trusts as a concept is something that has existed for a very long time. I mean, it may potentially have been around in one form or another for as long as we've been around. Now, obviously, the modern variant of trusts is very specific, and there are different types of trusts that can come into play. So what is a trust? A trust is simply a three-party arrangement, a type of legal contract or agreement where assets, meaning something of value, some property, is set aside for a specific purpose. It's set aside specifically to be stewarded or maintained for the benefit of one of those three parties. So the reason it's a three-party system is you have someone who comes along who has assets that maybe they've previously held themselves, it's their own property, and they come along and say, this is my property, but I actually want someone else to steward it, to maintain it over time, including after I'm long gone, but I want them to do it for someone else's benefit, for the third party. So the first party, we call them the grantor, the one who grants the property into the trust. The second party we call the trustee. That's the party who is entrusted with stewarding the assets, protecting them and defending them over time. And then the third party, of course, is the beneficiary. They're the ones who get to benefit from the assets. So it's a very interesting framework. It has a lot of derivative benefits. The first benefit is called asset protection. So why is this important? So when you, for example, let's say you go buy a house, okay? So you take out a mortgage, perhaps, and you go buy a house. So now you have a house, but essentially you have a mortgage because you're paying for the house, right? And typically most people, when they buy a mortgage, unless they're doing a commercial transaction or an investment through a business, most people will do it in their own name. So meaning you and potentially your spouse, maybe another partner, would essentially buy the house in your own personal liability. Okay? So the house is in your name, or the mortgage is in your name. So what that means is, well, actually, we don't even, we can just, it's regardless of whether there's a mortgage. If you even buy the house outright or you already own it, it's still going to, for this example, still going to be in your name, whether there's a mortgage or not. So what's the issue there? Well, the house is an asset. The house is an asset. It can, for example, its value can increase over time, and often does. And it has, even though it's not a liquid asset in the sense that you would have to sell the house in order to extract the dollar amount or the, cash value of the house, that's still something that can be done. So it's an asset. Assets, by their very nature, are subject to what I call the three Asians. So taxation, regulation, perhaps a little less so with houses, although there are certain zoning requirements that can apply to even residential homes, and litigation or lawsuits. In other words, lawsuits, claims, judgments, could be debt related, could be just any kind of judgment. So what that means is if you have a big liability, whether it's someone has sued you, or there's some regulatory requirement, or you owe taxes, for whatever reason you have some big liability of any of those liabilities, and you're not able to, if a judgment is awarded against you in the court, for example, then the judge or the legal system can come along and say, well, you own this house, it's in your name, you have an obligation, we can force you to liquidate that home in order to satisfy the obligation. And it could be even the mortgage itself. So it's all in your liability. So basically, you've probably heard the expression, with ownership comes liability, or its counterpart, own nothing, control everything. So basically what's happening is when you acquire these properties in your own name, they're not really protected if there's a judgment brought against you, okay? And the same is actually true for your business. If a business owns assets and you're sued personally or the business, it's very easy for the courts to come along and just seize those assets. And for the business, the part of the reason is because every business that's incorporated, such as an LLC or a corporation, well, those are all registered entities, right? In order to set those up, you had to register with the Secretary of State, or if you're in another country, you had to register with some entity that regulates the establishment of a business entity. And that means the state has an automatic security interest in those entities. So they can come and seize those assets owned by the business even to satisfy personal claims brought against you as the business owner. Okay, so even there, you're not really protected. So there isn't really any strong asset protection in terms of when you buy things in your own personal liability or even in a business. Okay, now privacy is the next benefit of private trusts that I mentioned, and we're going to get into how private trusts do this in a minute. So the issue with privacy is, to some extent, privacy really has to do with, for example, if your family, you would consider your family affairs to be private, right? You don't want them out in the public. But even if you own a business, again, an LLC or a corporation, even though it's a registered entity, you want to keep your business activities private, right? You don't necessarily want everybody to know about them. That's why we call it proprietary. Okay? But again, because the state has a security interest in your business, automatically, because you registered it, you can't really enforce true privacy there, right? To some extent, it's all out there. Okay? And then the third aspect is limited liability. Now, again, it's right in the name of a of the company, limited liability company, or LLC. Okay, and other countries have a similar construct. So the idea right there is, am I not limiting my liability by operating using an entity like that? And what does that even mean, to limit your liability? Limited liability means that the entity that's conducting commerce, in this case the business, is the party that's liable, and you're not personally liable for the liabilities of the business, as long as you act morally and do the right thing, as long as you don't act in gross negligence or engage in what's called willful misconduct, where you're conducting some kind of untoward activity with the business assets. So as long as you're doing your proper duty, the idea is that you're not personally liable for what happens in the business, any claims that come against the business. Okay, so that's the idea of limited liability, and vice versa. The business is not liable for your personal issues. Okay, so it creates a separation. So again, asset protection. So those assets can't be seized to satisfy claims. Privacy, so that your endeavors or your activities are kept private. And limited liability. So there's a separation of liability. So you're not personally liable for what the business does or the entity, and vice versa. So these are the three things that we are striving for. And as I mentioned, because all limited liability companies and corporations and so forth are registered entities, the state has the state is like a co-owner of all those entities. So it has an automatic security interest in them, which means if any of those end up in the court, you don't really have true asset protection or limited liability, because the state could just cross over that line based on that security interest and essentially ownership of that entity. So how do we address all that? The only way to do it properly from a legal and lawful perspective is to use private irrevocable trusts. Private irrevocable trusts. And that's why we focus so much on trusts as part of the Freedom Studio. It's one of the main pillars of what we teach, of the education we provide, of our focus. It's how we operate. It's how we operate as an organization. And many of our members also have set up private trusts. So private trusts is, despite maybe the reputation, they are accessible to everyone. You don't have to be an ultra rich family. You don't have to be super wealthy to access this knowledge. It's generally been discouraged and been a little bit difficult to get a hold of that knowledge, which is, again, why we focus so much on education at the Freedom Studio. So private trusts, well established in law. There's a long precedence of case law going back hundreds of years that demonstrates clearly that private trusts are recognized as entities that can conduct business, they can do commerce, they can hold assets, and they can afford limited liability, privacy, and asset protection. They are private by their very nature because they're not registered. You would never register a private irrevocable trust. Okay, you might, in some cases, there may be an interface with the public vis-a-vis, for example, if a trust has a bank account, obviously it's going to be its existence is going to be known to some extent. But the actual contract, which is it's called a trust indenture, which is kind of the private analog to the operating agreement of an LLC or the corporate bylaws of a corporation. Unlike those entities, this is completely private, and just a handful of people, including the trustees, would even know about its existence and would even know the contents of that contract. So it's a very private contract. And any other contracts that the trust enters into are treated similarly. They're very private. Okay. Now, what takes private trusts to the next level is combining them with equity jurisprudence, with equity as a legal jurisdiction. Again, nothing new. As the famous saying goes, there is nothing new under the sun. This is all timeless knowledge. This has all been around for a very long time. It's just been very well hidden. Okay, so when you combine a private trust with equity, and when I say combine, what does that mean? Well, just like any contract, a contract needs to be established in some legal jurisdiction. So most of the contracts that you and I are familiar with and that businesses operate under, the vast majority of them, they are called statutory, because they're subject to statute and code, which is the code that applies to corporations and corporate legal persons. Okay, it's also called maritime admiralty commercial jurisdiction, and it's basically the modern equivalent of law merchants. It's based on the UCC in the United States, the Uniform Commercial Code, and the Bill of Exchange in other Western countries. Okay, so it's this corporate code that is kind of derived in its history from Roman law. It's highly regulated, it's highly prolific, it's just constantly more and more regulations. Okay, and it's statutory, and usually you have to hire an attorney at law to help you create these kinds of contracts, or at least most people are used to running them through an attorney. So that's the statutory or maritime admiralty commercial jurisdiction. Now, above that, because it is a higher level, is what's called common law. Okay, so some folks, as they've gone out to explore setting up trusts, they probably have come across, for example, the Massachusetts type business trust, or the unincorporated business organization trust, the UBOT, or just the common law trust. So this is already much better than a statutory trust in that you don't need to hire an attorney to create one. It's not in the statutory jurisdiction by default. It's in common law. Okay? And so by its nature, it's already better at providing asset protection, privacy, and limited liability. However, it's still not the best that we can do. It still falls short of the high standard. And that's just because common law itself falls short of that standard. In fact, this was recognized hundreds of years ago that common law was falling short, particularly in the area of trusts. They couldn't really provide adequate remedies for beneficiaries of a trust when their interests were being harmed, because they're not a signing party to the trust as a beneficiary, and they have no legal title to the assets of the trust. So they were kind of being left out. And also, common law is very rigid. It's really about awarding damages based on violations of contract agreements, and not really about getting people to do or not to do a thing. So along came equity. And again, this is hundreds of years ago. This is not something that just happened. Along comes equity that is created as what's called the laws of fairness and right dealing, the most flexible man-made legal jurisdiction of all. Equity, the jurisdiction that can literally create a remedy where none exists. And that is the in my opinion, and it's not just my opinion, but it's obviously is my opinion, but again, you can discover this for yourself. It is much higher than both common law, because it was built on top of common law, and it's certainly higher than statutory. Okay, it's about as close as you can get to natural law. It's a very close approximation to the way morality actually works subjectively in nature, and that's what makes it so powerful. Actually, one of the maxims of equity is it acts on the conscience, because equity is all about good conscience, doing the right thing. And therefore, the remedy of equity is largely about getting people to do the right thing. So that's why the principal remedy at equity, or one of them, is called compelled specific performance. Compelled specific performance. Getting people to do the right thing. So, what does that have to do with trusts? When you establish a trust in equity, meaning you establish the trust in the equity legal jurisdiction, you are essentially conferring to that trust the highest level of power and protection in law, from a legal perspective that you can possibly do. Okay, again, higher than statutory, which statute, we can really discard that because that only applies to corporations and persons, not to actual men and women. Common law is better because it applies to property, but again, it's not the best. And then equity, which is said to act in personam, it acts on people. Okay? So in many ways, a trust that is established in equity has almost the same rights as a living man or woman. It's very high up. Okay? A trust is held, a trust that's established in equities is very highly regarded, and it has a very high level of rights in the law or under the law, even the commercial law. Okay, an equity trust does not need statute to operate. It does not require the force of statute to even protect it. However, these kind of trusts can, in the worst case, still end up in a court of law, in a commercial court. And when they do, because they are established in equity, and when they are being stewarded by equity-minded or equity-trained trustees, then that provides the maximum level of protection. Okay, so that's why and how an equity trust can serve you. What are some use cases? Well, if you're watching this, you may be a family head of household, you may be a family member, you may be thinking about this in the context of your family. So that's a great use case. And the other big use case, of course, is a business owner, or the owner or the director of a business or an organization that's conducting commerce. So these are the two use cases. Why? Because families have assets, homes, cars, investments, etc., other properties, personal property, and businesses have assets, intellectual property, again, physical, real property, buildings, structures, business equipment, business processes, accounts, investments, etc. So businesses, everything is commercial, of course. Even in families, we're all conducting commerce. Businesses, is more obvious that they are commercial endeavors. So both businesses and families have assets. So asset protection is going to be important in the context of either a business or family. Privacy is obviously important. I would say it's particularly important for families, and it's particularly unfortunate that a lot of family issues end up in the courts or end up in the public. That's a particular pet peeve of mine, something I've talked about and will continue to talk about. And then, of course, we talk about limited liability, which is one of the main reasons why we set up businesses in the first place, to separate liability. So trusts, a properly set up private trust system, private irrevocable trust in equity with trustees who know equity, is really going to provide the maximum level of asset protection, the maximum level of privacy, and the maximum level of limiting liability of the parties involved when it's properly set up and properly maintained. Okay. Now notice I qualified that a bit as it's got to be properly set up, properly established, and properly maintained, meaning you have to have the right people in place to operate it over time. So how do we help you with that? So the Freedom Studio, we're solutions oriented. We're an education organization. So we're all about teaching people how to do these things. So if you want to dive in deeper and learn how private trusts, private irrevocable trusts work in equity and learn how to apply equity, obviously, I mean, if you've been following our work, you already know that we have courses and education material on that. If not, I want to invite you to go explore what we have to offer vis-a-vis our courses and memberships, and you can begin your study at any point. It's never too late to begin. Now might be the perfect moment, especially since it's a new year, and maybe it's a great New Year's resolution for you to jump in and start learning. So that's one way to do it. However, for business owners in particular, it may be a big time commitment to start devoting, months and months of study to set this all up and get everything going, when frankly you're already busy running your business. And I get it. I mean, that's you're being compensated for being the visionary and the one who can carry your business forward. So now if you have to start taking this whole path where you need to start learning about private trust and equity and how to run it all, that's a lot of work. So to address that, we have a solution. Okay, we call it the Trust Concierge. And the Trust Concierge is a done with you service. Okay, it's not done for you, it's done with you. So we work very closely with you. And what we do is we work very closely with business owners and founders, leaders of companies and organizations, and also families. And we sit down and we basically get you from where you are now to having an actual equity trust system, meaning a system of private trusts established in equity with trustees, and we get you up and running as quickly as we can while still being thorough. In other words, without skipping any important steps, without breaking any of the best practices. So we get you the shortest path to get you up and running, right? Because it's not going to be worth it to invest any amount of time, effort, or resources into something if it's not going to actually be practical. Okay. So what is that typical time frame for the Trust Concierge? I mean, obviously it depends. There's a couple of factors. It's going to depend on you and your part, but we're generally seeing that you can be fully up and running in about 30 to 60 days, which if you think about it is pretty fast, considering that you're now going to have a system that could literally outlive you. I mean, these trust systems are designed to go on for generations potentially. So you're putting something in place that sure, it's going to evolve and you may add new layers and add new trusts over time, but it is in place from day one, established and ready to help you protect your assets or your business or family assets, help you to be more private in all of your commercial endeavors, keep things out of the public, and limit the liability of the parties involved, particularly the beneficiaries. Okay? So, if that's intriguing to you and you want to check it out, there will be links somewhere below this video to the Trust Concierge. We do have a page on our website where you can explore that. I wanted to introduce that to you and just talk to you about it in this new year because, hey, it's a new year. It's time of renewal. I mean, in some ways, we know time is just continuous. Time is always moving in one direction. And it's kind of arbitrary in a way to say, okay, well, now it's a new year and we suddenly have to change things. But it creates a nice guidepost. It creates a nice little inflection point where we can stop and think about and say, oh, okay, maybe I should take a step back and think about what's important to focus on this year. What do I want to do different that I haven't done? What's going to be most important? So I think from that point of view, I do consider it very valuable that we have kind of the new year and the change of year. And hey, maybe this is the right time for you to really think about, how do I protect and defend all of this value that I'm creating? How do I properly protect and defend all this value I'm creating, either through my business or maybe through family investments, or both, so that future generations and future customers, they're taken care of, right? This great value that I'm creating is protected. Okay, because remember what Jim Rohn said, that you've heard me quote before: all good will be attacked, everything of value must be defended. That was Jim Rohn. Great guy, by the way. Go check out. I mean, he's since passed away, but he had some great ideas. So go check out his work, Jim Rohn. So I hope this has been valuable. Again, we're all about education. I'm just here riffing, just sharing ideas with you, giving you as much value as I can. Hopefully this has given you some insights. Again, go ahead and check out thefreedom.studio if you want to explore anything that we have to offer, whether it's the free workshops, memberships, courses, and other events. Then go check it out. And I look forward to hopefully meeting you very soon. Okay, thank you very much and take care.